Your eyes open at 3 in the morning, and your heart is already running. Cool sheets, a dim ceiling, a body surfacing between cycles. Ordinary. So which is your 3 in the morning, rhythm or signal? Here's the strange part. The waking itself rarely tells you much. What happens in the 20 minutes afterward tells you far more. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. So tonight, nothing gets diagnosed and nothing gets fixed. There is only a calm way of telling those two apart, and it begins long before you ever opened your eyes. You're lying in the cool hollow of a bed that still holds your warmth, in a room where being awake is allowed for a while. We start where the sorting starts, with what an ordinary night already looks like from the inside. Your eyes open in the dark, and before you have even turned toward the clock, your chest is already moving faster than it was. Sleep researchers call this a nocturnal awakening, one of the most commonly reported experiences in sleep medicine. What follows is rarely about sleep at all. It is the arithmetic, how many hours are left, how tomorrow will feel, whether something inside you has quietly stopped working. That arithmetic arrives faster than thought, landing on a body that was, seconds earlier, at rest. The waking itself cost you nothing. The story about it is what lifts the pulse. So underneath tonight sits one quiet question. When is opening your eyes simply the rhythm of the night, and when is it the body mentioning something worth hearing? There is a particular loneliness in being awake at 3 in the morning, as though the whole world stayed asleep and only you fell out of it. The research says otherwise, and it says so plainly. Brief awakenings during the night are a normal feature of human sleep, not a departure from it. In sleep laboratories, people are recorded across a full night. The traces show the brain surfacing and settling again and again in nearly everyone. That includes the people who describe themselves as excellent sleepers. The room feels empty at that hour because the house is quiet, not because your body has done something no one else's does. You were never the only one awake. You were simply the one who noticed. Most people picture sleep as a single block. You go under, and hours later you come back up. What overnight recordings actually show is something closer to a series of arcs, each one lasting roughly 90 minutes, repeating 4 to 6 times before morning. Within each arc, the brain moves down through lighter stages into deep, slow-wave sleep, then climbs back up toward REM, where dreaming is richest. At the top of that climb, the brain is much closer to the surface than it was at the bottom. Sleep is not a floor you fall onto. It is a tide that rises and falls all night, on its own schedule, without asking you first. Perhaps you have woken with the sense that you had just finished something, a scene, a conversation, a place you were standing. You were probably at the seam between 2 of those arcs. Researchers call these transitions the point where brief arousals cluster, and they're built into the architecture rather than layered on top of it. As one cycle closes and the next begins, the brain passes through a shallow doorway. Sometimes it goes straight through. Sometimes it pauses there, and the eyes open for a moment. Nothing has gone wrong when this happens. The doorway is part of the design, and every night you pass through it several times over. Here is the part that changes how the whole night reads. You have almost certainly woken more times than you can recall. Memory researchers have found that turning a moment of wakefulness into a memory takes a stretch of continuous alertness, longer as a rule than most night waking lasts. Most surfacings end well before the recording ever begins. The brain surfaces, notices nothing worth filing, and sinks again. By morning, there is no record, because no record was ever made. This is not forgetting in the ordinary sense. It is a moment that never crossed the threshold into being remembered at all. Your night was fuller of small awakenings than your memory of it will ever admit. Think of the person you know who claims they sleep straight through every night without stirring. What the recordings suggest is that they wake much as you do. The difference lives in whether the waking was long enough or charged enough to be stored. Someone who opens their eyes and drifts back within 40 seconds wakes up believing they slept unbroken. Someone who opens their eyes and lies there for 15 minutes wakes up believing they had a broken night. The underlying sleep may be remarkably similar. What differs is the recording, not the sleep. The gap between a good sleeper and a frustrated one is often much narrower than the frustration suggests. You may have turned over in the night and had no idea you did it. Sleep recordings routinely capture position changes, small shifts of the shoulders and hips that coincide with those brief surfacings. The sleeper reports none of them in the morning. Some of these movements are the body relieving pressure on one side. Some accompany the transition between cycles. Either way, they are evidence of a night that was more active than it felt. Your body has been quietly managing itself for hours while you were, as far as you were concerned, simply asleep. The stillness you imagine when you picture a sleeping person has never really existed. There is something in us that treats waking as a failure, as if the body had one job and lost track of it. Sleep scientists tend to describe those brief surfacings differently, as a system checking in. During a shallow phase, the brain becomes more responsive to what is happening around it. Sounds, temperature, the position of the body, whether anything nearby has changed. Then it settles again. This responsiveness is why a strange room can wake you, and a familiar one rarely does. Sleep was never meant to be a sealed chamber. It was built with windows, and the windows open on purpose. If you've ever noticed that you sleep more lightly when you are somewhere unfamiliar, that is the same system, turned up a little. Researchers have studied humans and other social sleepers. They describe a pattern in which not everyone in a group is deeply asleep at the same moment. The lighter sleepers, in effect, keep watch. Whatever its origins, the arrangement leaves a trace in your own night. A nervous system that never fully closes the door, one that keeps a thread of attention running underneath the rest. Waking briefly is not the system breaking down. It is the same thread that made sleeping in the open survivable for a very long time. There is an old assumption behind the frustration, that a single unbroken block is what human sleep has always looked like. Historians have gone through pre-industrial letters, court records, and medical writing. They describe something else entirely, references to a first sleep and a second sleep with a quiet interval between them that nobody seemed to find troubling. People used that interval. They prayed, talked, tended fires, and went back down. Whether or not that pattern was universal, the record makes one thing clear. The expectation of a night as one seamless piece is far newer than the night itself. You may be measuring your sleep against a standard that was never the only one. So the sentence worth setting down before anything else is a simple one. Waking in the night is not, by itself, a malfunction. It happens in healthy sleepers, in every age group, in every culture that has been studied. It happens on the nights you feel rested and on the nights you do not. It is written into the shape of the cycles rather than imposed on them from outside. This does not mean nothing ever deserves attention. There are patterns that do, and this hour will come to them without rushing. But the starting point is not that something is wrong with you. The starting point is that your body did an ordinary thing. Still, you have probably noticed that the waking rarely happens at 11 at night. It clusters in the small hours, and there is a reason the second half of the night behaves differently from the first. Deep, slow-wave sleep is front-loaded. The body takes most of it in the early cycles, when the pressure to sleep is highest. As the night goes on, the arcs shift their composition. Less slow-wave, more light, stage 2, longer stretches of REM. That later sleep is genuinely nearer the surface. The hour you wake is not a message about your character. It is where the shallow part of the night happens to sit. This is also why people spend so long hunting for the thing that woke them. A car door, a partner turning over, a dream that ended too abruptly. There is almost always a candidate, and finding one feels like an answer. But candidates are never in short supply. On any given night, something is available to do the lifting, and most nights something does, without costing you anything at all. What is far rarer is a night where the lifting turns into hours. That is why the search for a culprit settles so little, and why it can be set down. The question that sorts one night from another is not what opened your eyes, it is what happened once they were open. There is another quiet shift running alongside it. In the hours before you are due to be up, the body begins raising cortisol, the hormone tied to alertness and readiness. It starts well ahead of the moment your eyes open. It is a slow lift, not a jolt, and it belongs to the same internal clock that governs temperature and hunger. Its purpose is to have you ready for daylight rather than startled into it. But it does mean that the last stretch of the night is being nudged, gently, toward waking. This mechanism has been mapped in detail elsewhere. For tonight, it is enough to know the tide is already turning under you. Which means the hour on the clock, the one that feels so personal, is doing far less than it seems to. 3 in the morning is simply where the lighter half of the night tends to land for a fairly common bedtime. Shift the bedtime, and the hour shifts with it. There is nothing addressed to you in that number. The reason it feels addressed is that you are awake, alone, and looking for a reason. And this is where tonight actually begins, because the mechanics of why you surfaced turn out to be the least interesting part of the story. What happens in the minutes afterward is where the real difference lives. You know the split second better than any of this, the moment between opening your eyes and the thought arriving. For a breath, there is only a dark room. Then comes the interpretation. Not again, I will be wrecked tomorrow. Something is wrong with me. Researchers who study insomnia describe that appraisal as the hinge the whole night turns on. The awakening was neutral. The meaning assigned to it is not, and the body responds to the meaning, not the event. This is why two people can wake at the identical hour and have entirely different nights. One thought about tomorrow, the other thought about nothing at all. Notice what your body does in the seconds after that thought lands. Heart rate climbs a little. Breathing shortens. A faint warmth or restlessness moves through the chest and limbs. What sleep researchers call hyperarousal is simply the nervous system doing what it was built to do when something is flagged as worth attending to. It sharpens you, holds you at the surface, and keeps the return to sleep just out of reach. The cruelty of it is that the thing being flagged is the sleeplessness itself. Your body is not betraying you at 3 in the morning. It is answering an emergency you unknowingly reported. Then there is the clock. Almost everyone looks, and almost everyone knows, somewhere underneath, that looking never helps. Sleep clinicians treat clock watching as one of the reliable ways to stay awake, and the reason is worth understanding rather than obeying. A soft, formless stretch of darkness has no edges in it to work on. A number gives it edges. The moment the hour becomes a figure, the mind has something to subtract from. Subtracting is a waking act. It calls up attention, judgment, and a small forecast of the day ahead, all at once, in a body that was resting a second ago. The dark was asking nothing of you. The number asks a question, and the body answers it by coming further awake. There is a particular frustration in trying very hard to fall asleep and feeling yourself get further away from it. Researchers have described this as sleep effort. The paradox that sleep is one of the few states that recedes the more deliberately you pursue it. Falling asleep depends on the nervous system standing down, and effort is, by definition, the system standing up. So the harder you push, the more firmly you hold the door closed. This is not a personal failing of willpower. It is a structural feature of how the state works, and nearly everyone who has lain awake trying has run straight into it. Nothing was wrong with your effort. The effort was the obstacle. If you have started to feel a small tightening the moment you get into bed, before anything has even happened, that reaction has a name too. Sleep researchers describe it as conditioned arousal. After enough nights of lying awake in the same place, the bed itself begins to signal alertness rather than rest. The association forms without permission and without awareness, the way any repeated pairing does. It is learning, not damage. And because it is learning, it does not describe something fixed about you. It describes something your nervous system picked up, in the dark, over time, from a room that used to mean only one thing. Underneath most of it sits tomorrow. The meeting, the drive, the children, the hours you are expected to be functional for. Studies of people who sleep poorly keep finding the same thing. Anticipating the fallout of a bad night predicts how the night goes almost as strongly as anything happening in the body. The mind runs the forecast, how you will look, how you will cope, what will slip, and the forecast keeps the system online. It is a strange loop. The worry about being tired is itself one of the reliable ways to stay awake, and the loop rarely announces itself. It simply feels like thinking about your life at an hour when nothing about your life can be changed. So the question has quietly moved while you were listening. It began as a question about why you wake. The answer to that turned out to be almost mundane, written into cycles and hormones and the shallow end of the night. What did not turn out to be mundane is everything that follows: the waking, the meaning, the alertness, the arithmetic, the room that learned to keep you sharp. If waking itself is common to nearly everyone, then something else separates a night you barely remember from a night that costs you something. Whatever it is not located in the waking at all. It sits in the minutes after. That is a different question, and it is the one worth carrying. Consider the nights you have woken and simply gone back down without ever registering it. Nothing in your body was different on those nights. What was different is that the surfacing was never converted into an event. No interpretation, no forecast, no clock. Sleep researchers ask what distinguishes an untroubled sleeper from a troubled one. They keep landing near this, not the frequency of awakenings, but what the awakening is permitted to mean. This is quietly good news, because meaning is far more workable than architecture. You cannot instruct your brain to skip a cycle boundary. You can, over time, change what your mind does when it arrives at one. Many people find that the awakenings which resolve themselves are the ones they never think about again. They surface, turn over, feel the weight of the blanket, and are gone within a few minutes, and in the morning, the night reads as whole. That experience of unbroken sleep is not the absence of waking. It is waking followed by an uneventful return. Sleep clinicians pay close attention to that return because it tends to say more about how a night went than the awakening ever does. The wake is the common part. The way back down is where nights begin to differ from one another. What this stretch keeps describing is a body doing something ordinary, and a mind that has learned to treat it as evidence of something else. That is the shape of the thing so far. The waking is shared by nearly everyone, and the suffering around it is not. But something is still missing from the picture, and you can probably feel where it sits. Because if waking is that common, there is a reason some nights it happens once and dissolves. Other nights it happens again and again, and something is clearly doing the waking. That something has a list of very ordinary names, and none of them are what you fear at 3 in the morning. The lightning you just heard about, the thin end of the night, the part with less depth in it, is not a theory about other people. It is happening in you right now, on its own schedule, whether or not you ever think about it again. Nothing there is waiting on your permission. And the question we opened has already changed its shape. It is no longer really about why the eyes open. It has moved toward what the room, the clock, and the mind do in the minutes afterward, and toward the plainer matter of what is doing the waking in the first place. Those causes are closer to your kitchen than to any clinic. Let the night stay shapeless for a little longer. We follow it from here. Almost everyone knows the night that starts easily. A glass of wine, eyelids heavy earlier than usual, sleep arriving without any effort. Researchers who study that particular ease describe alcohol as a sedative rather than a sleep aid. The difference between those two words is where the second half of the night gets decided. Sedation quiets the systems that keep you alert, so the doorway into sleep opens quickly. Underneath, the architecture is already being rearranged, deeper sleep pulled forward into the early hours, and the kind of debt quietly written for later. The evening that felt like your easiest sleep of the week is often the same evening your 3 in the morning belongs to. There is a specific pattern many people recognize without ever naming it: asleep by 10, wide awake by 3, and no explanation in the room. Sleep research describes this as a rebound. As alcohol clears the bloodstream, the sedative pressure lifts and the nervous system swings back toward alertness. The first half of the night runs unusually heavy. Then, somewhere in the small hours, the chemistry that was holding you under simply finishes. What is left is a brain that has been suppressed and is now correcting in the other direction. Nothing about that waking is a personal failure. It is the second half of a chemical curve you fell asleep on the first half of. If you have ever woken from strangely vivid, crowded dreams in the last stretch of the night, that too has a mechanism behind it. Studies consistently find that alcohol suppresses dreaming sleep early in the night, and the brain tends to reclaim what it lost once the alcohol is gone. So the final hours carry a dense, compressed load of dream activity, and dream-rich sleep is naturally lighter and easier to surface from. The dreams themselves are not a symptom of anything. They are the brain catching up on a stage of sleep it was not allowed to have earlier. It does that all at once, in the hours you happen to notice. You may have noticed that a night after drinking leaves you tired in a way that sleeping longer does not fix. Newer research using wearable trackers points at a reason many people find clarifying. Overnight heart rate tends to run higher after alcohol. The beat-to-beat variability that usually rises during restful sleep tends to fall. The body spends part of the night in a lightly activated state rather than a settled one. It is why you can log a full 8 hours and still surface at 3 with a warm chest and a fast pulse. The hours were there. The quality underneath them was working on something else. A late dinner has a particular signature: lying flat, faintly too full, sleep coming slowly and then breaking apart hours later. Research on meal timing suggests the body is being asked to do 2 opposite things at once. Digestion raises core temperature and lifts activity. Falling asleep depends on core temperature drifting down. Large or fatty meals stay in the stomach longer. Lying flat also makes it easier for stomach contents to move upward, which can lift you toward the surface without ever fully waking you. Nothing has gone wrong in your body. It is simply still working a shift you gave it late. There is also the version that has nothing to do with fullness, the late sugary snack, the dessert close to bed, the sleep that feels shallow afterward. This one is less settled than it sounds. Research on late eating and night waking describes an association more than a mechanism, and the explanations are still being argued over. What can be said plainly is what many notice: something sweet, eaten close to sleep, is often followed by a lighter, more interrupted second half of the night. That is worth testing on your own week rather than believing on anyone's authority, including this one. The food felt small and the waking enormous, further apart in time than they feel. Most people know the rule about coffee at night, and most people quietly believe the afternoon is safe. Caffeine research complicates that gently. Caffeine has a half-life of roughly 5 to 6 hours in a typical adult. Half of a 3 o'clock cup can still be circulating at 9, and a trace remains far later. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine, the molecule that builds sleep pressure through the day. Blocked adenosine does not disappear, it accumulates behind the block. Sensitivity also varies widely between people for genetic reasons, which is why one person's afternoon espresso is another person's 3 in the morning. A room that felt pleasant at bedtime can feel entirely different at 3. Research on body heat offers a reason. Sleep begins with a drop in core body temperature, and the lowest point of that curve falls in the early hours. That is close to the time so many people surface. During dream-rich sleep, the body also loosens its grip on temperature control, relying more on the room than on itself. So a space that was merely warm at 11 becomes a space your body cannot correct for at 3. Many people find that the waking they blamed on their mind was, in fact, a small argument with the air around them. There is a particular kind of waking that comes with a room that is not quite dark. A street light through a gap, a charging light, the earliest edge of dawn in summer. Light research shows the eye holds special cells that report brightness straight to the body clock. They do not require you to be awake or even to open your eyes fully to register a signal. In the last third of the night, the clock is already primed to receive morning. A small amount of light arriving then is read as information, not as an intrusion. The room speaks, and the body listens. Sound is the sense that never fully clocks out. Sleep laboratories have shown that the brain keeps processing what it hears through the night. It sorts familiar sounds from unfamiliar ones and reacts to change more than to volume. A steady fan can pass unnoticed, while a single door closing does not. This is also why partners, traffic, and old pipes produce brief surfacings that most people never remember at all. The second half of a night, being lighter, is simply when those surfacings are more likely to become a waking you keep. Your hearing was doing its job. It has been doing it all night. The trip to the bathroom feels like the obvious explanation, and often it is only half of one. Research on nighttime urination suggests something quieter. The bladder rarely creates the awakening on its own. The body slows urine production overnight through a hormone that shifts with age and with fluid timing. A bladder signal usually reaches awareness only once sleep has already thinned into its lighter stages. So the sequence many people assume runs backward. The bladder did not lift you out of sleep. More often, you surfaced first and then noticed it. The bathroom becomes the story because it is the part you can remember. Then there is the cause that has no chemistry to blame, the day itself, arriving late. Stress research describes a nervous system that stays slightly raised long after a hard afternoon has ended. Alerting hormones run a little higher, and the body holds a readiness it was never told to release. During the day, motion and noise cover that readiness completely. At 3 in the morning, there is nothing covering anything. What surfaces then is not new. It is the part of the day you did not have room to finish, finally finding a room with nothing else in it. Almost everyone has met the 3 o'clock version of their own thoughts, heavier, more certain, and stranger than the same thoughts at noon. Researchers who study nighttime thinking find that the brain regions holding perspective are less available in the small hours. The circuits that generate threat and rumination stay fully awake. So the problem you are turning over is real, but the size it appears to be is not. Many people find it steadying simply to know that the distortion is predictable. The thought is yours. The proportions belong to the hour. Some nights have a cause that lives outside behavior entirely. Ongoing health conditions, pain, breathing patterns, hormonal shifts, and a wide range of common medications can all change how deep sleep goes and how easily it breaks. And none of that can be sorted out from a script or from the inside of a difficult night. Speaking generally is the only honest thing to do here. These are real, well-documented influences, and they are also individual. A doctor or pharmacist who knows your history is the person who can look at the actual list. Naming that possibility calmly is not the same as worrying about it. And then there is the cause nobody chooses. Sleep research is consistent that sleep becomes lighter with age. Slow-wave sleep thins, brief awakenings grow more common, and the body clock tends to shift earlier. That is a change in texture, not a loss of health, which quietly reshapes the question this hour has been carrying. So many ordinary things can lift you out of sleep: a drink, a warm room, a long day, another year. The waking itself was never going to be the useful signal. Something else is doing the sorting, and it happens after your eyes are already open. Something in the room has gone quieter than it was, the breath a little longer, the list of possible reasons a little lighter than it seemed an hour ago. None of what you have heard is a verdict on you. Let one slow breath out, and let the night stay ordinary for a moment. We keep going from here, gently. Almost everyone has known 2 different kinds of waking in the middle of the night. The one you barely remember, and the one that keeps you company until the window turns grey. Sleep researchers pay less attention to the opening of the eyes than to what follows it. The rough line drawn in clinical work runs here. Waking, turning over, and drifting back within roughly 15 to 20 minutes is treated as ordinary sleep behavior, the sort almost every healthy sleeper does. Waking and then lying there for a long stretch night after night is the pattern that carries a name. The waking is common ground. The returning is where the 2 paths quietly separate. You have probably had one night that went badly, and a whole week afterward that went fine. Sleep science treats that kind of scattered disruption as normal variation, not as a condition. A late meal, a warm room, a hard conversation replaying itself, a glass of wine, a time zone still catching up. Any of these can open the second half of a night. The body usually settles back on its own over the following nights. Nights are not identical units. They fluctuate the way appetite and mood fluctuate, without anything underneath them being broken. One rough night is a night. It is not a diagnosis, and it was never meant to be read as one. There is a difference between remembering a bad night and recognizing a shape you have been living inside for a while. What changes the picture is not how severe any single night felt, but how often the same night repeats. When waking is followed by long stretches of lying awake, and that happens across many weeks rather than a scattered few, sleep medicine has a plain description for it: sleep maintenance insomnia. The name only describes the pattern, falling asleep without much trouble, then losing the second half. It carries no judgment about willpower, character, or how hard anyone has tried. A pattern is simply something that has been happening long enough to be seen. If you have ever wondered where the line sits between a difficult season of sleep and something worth mentioning to a doctor, the professional criteria draw it fairly gently. Chronic insomnia is described as difficulty sleeping, falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking too early on 3 or more nights a week, continuing for 3 months or longer, together with effects that carry into the daytime. All 3 parts are present in that description. It is not a verdict, and nothing said here can tell you whether it fits you. It is a threshold, quietly agreed on, that marks the point where a conversation with a doctor tends to be useful rather than premature. Most people measure their sleep by how the night felt, but the criteria measures something else entirely. The daytime is treated as the real instrument. Broken nights that leave the following day essentially intact are held differently from broken nights that thin out attention, shorten patience, or make ordinary tasks cost more than they used to. This is why 2 people with almost identical hours of sleep can sit on opposite sides of the same line. The question is not how many minutes were lost. It is what the day afterward can still carry. Your body has been keeping that record all along, whether or not anyone asked to see it. There is a particular kind of alertness that arrives the moment you realize you are awake and start counting. How long until the alarm, how tomorrow will go, how many nights this makes. That is the conditioned arousal named earlier, met here in a different role. What matters here is not what it is called, but what repetition does with it. A handful of such nights leaves no mark. The weeks close over it. Enough of them in a row, and the alertness begins arriving on its own schedule, ahead of any cause, because it has been practiced. That is how the occasional turns into the frequent, and frequency, not severity, is what the clinical picture listens for. Somewhere along the way, most people who sleep poorly have read something frightening about what it does to the body and carried that reading back into bed with them. Population research does describe statistical associations between long-standing insomnia and outcomes involving the heart, metabolism, and mood. Those associations are worth stating honestly, and worth framing just as honestly. They are averages measured across very large groups over long periods, tangled with other factors, and an association is not a personal prognosis. It cannot tell any single person what their own body will do. What research points toward is a reason to address a long-running pattern with help, not a reason to spend the next hour afraid. Sometimes the reason for waking is something the sleeper cannot see, because it happens while they are asleep. There are a few observations that doctors treat as reasons to look further rather than to reassure. Loud snoring, especially when the waking arrives with gasping, choking, or the feeling of catching your breath, is one of them. Sleep-disordered breathing is diagnosed with proper testing, never from a description. Getting up to urinate several times a night is another, since it has ordinary explanations and less ordinary ones, and only an examination can tell which. Noticing these is not diagnosing yourself. It is gathering the details someone qualified can actually use. Other night wakings arrive with a companion, an ache that finds you when the distractions of the day are gone, or legs with an unsettled urge to move that eases only when you move them. Pain, restless legs, and reflux each have their own clinical paths, and each is treatable once it is named by someone able to name it. There is one more worth mentioning calmly, waking consistently earlier than intended, with mood that stays low through the following days, is a pattern doctors like to hear about because it sometimes travels with depression. None of this describes you. It describes what a doctor listens for, so that you know what is worth saying out loud. So the question you carried into this hour has quietly changed shape. It was never really whether you wake at 3 in the morning. Nearly everyone does, most nights, usually without knowing it. The question underneath was always about the 20 minutes that follow, and how many nights in a row those 20 minutes stretch into something longer. That is a far kinder question, because unlike the waking itself, that stretch responds to things. Everything from here follows that narrower opening. What happens in the space between opening your eyes and returning, and why some nights close it easily while others hold it open until morning. Right now, in the quiet after all of that, something may have tightened a little, the part of you that was listening for whether the line described your nights. Let that part rest. Nothing was decided about you tonight. The line was only drawn so you would have something calmer to think with the next time you find yourself awake in the dark. Feel where your body meets the bed. Let your jaw loosen. Let the next breath out take a little longer than the one before it. What comes next stays inside those 20 minutes and moves toward what softens them. We follow it gently from here. You may have tried going to bed earlier after a rough night and noticed it changed almost nothing. Sleep researchers have found that the body clock takes its strongest cue not from when you lie down, but from when you get up. A wake time held roughly steady, weekends included, tells the inner clock where the day begins. The rest of the rhythm arranges itself around that signal. Bedtime drifts, waking is the fixed point. Many people find that keeping one wake time, even after a broken night, steadies more than any bedtime rule they tried. The night quietly organizes itself around the morning. There is a difference between the mornings you step outside and the mornings you go from bed to a lit hallway, even if you could never say what it is. Researchers describe morning light as the strongest timing signal a human clock receives. Light reaching the eye early in the day tells a small cluster of cells deep in the brain that the day has begun. That message quietly sets when melatonin will rise again 15 or 16 hours later. Outdoor light, even under heavy cloud, carries far more of that signal than indoor lighting does. The morning you barely noticed was already shaping the night ahead. Perhaps you have felt that Monday nights are the hardest, without connecting it to Sunday's long lie-in. Researchers use the phrase social jet lag for what happens when wake times swing by an hour or two across the week. The internal clock reads each shift the way it would read travel across time zones, and it adjusts slowly, often more slowly than the week allows. A weekend that feels restful can leave the clock pointing somewhere the weekday does not. You can narrow that swing gently, an hour at a time. Nothing about your nights was random. They were following a rhythm you had not been shown. After a night broken at 3, the pull to sleep in feels almost gravitational. What sleep science offers here is not a rule, but a mechanism. The pressure to sleep builds from the moment you wake. Every hour you stay in bed past your usual time spends some of what would have carried you into the following night. Many people find that rising close to their usual hour, tired, unglamorous, a little resentful, leaves the next night easier than the borrowed morning did. It is a trade, not a punishment. The tiredness you carry through one day is often what buys back the night. You may have lain down early on purpose, hoping to bank sleep against a bad week. Researchers describe the two systems that decide when sleep arrives, the clock and the pressure that accumulates with time awake. Going to bed before that pressure has gathered tends to produce a longer wait in the dark rather than a longer night. Lying awake there also teaches the bed something you would rather it did not learn. Letting bedtime follow sleepiness rather than the calendar allows both systems to arrive together. Sleep is less a decision than a meeting, and both halves arrive on their own schedule. If your bed has begun to feel like a place where your mind wakes rather than settles, that is not imagination. Sleep researchers describe the bed as something the brain learns, the way it learns a smell or a room. Dozens of nights lying awake, thinking, calculating, waiting, and the bed slowly stops meaning sleep and starts meaning vigilance. What was taught that way can be taught again, which is why this part of the night has handles on it. Nothing is broken in a brain that does this. It is doing what learning brains do. The bed was never against you. It had simply been taught wrong. There is a moment somewhere past the 20-minute mark when lying there stops helping and starts hardening. A technique called stimulus control, developed within cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, works with that exact moment. The invitation is simple. If you are awake well beyond roughly 20 minutes and the mind has begun to churn, you can get up, leave the bedroom, and do something quiet in dim light until sleepiness returns. No clock checking is involved. The 20 minutes is a feeling, not a measurement. Leaving the bed is not giving up on sleep. It is protecting what the bed means. The question that follows is always the same. Get up and do what, exactly, at 3 in the morning? Researchers who study this technique suggest something deliberately unrewarding. A dull page of a book you have read before, a slow stretch, sitting in a chair in near darkness. Anything absorbing enough to interrupt the churn and quiet enough not to wake the system further. Bright screens, work and news tend to work against the whole purpose. Many people find a single lamp turned low is all the light they want. You can be awake without being activated. That distinction is most of the technique. Coming back to bed too soon has its own particular disappointment. The signal worth waiting for is sleepiness. Heavy eyes, a head that wants a pillow, thoughts losing their edges. Tiredness is a different thing, a body complaint that can sit alongside a wide-awake mind for hours. Returning its sleepiness lets the bed be a place where sleep actually happens, which is the entire point of leaving it. Some nights that means 1 trip out of the bedroom, some nights 2. Over weeks the bed relearns what it is for, and it relearns it faster than most people expect. It sounds backwards, and most people resist it the first few nights, leaving the bed in order to sleep more. What the research keeps finding is that time spent awake in bed is the ingredient that maintains the pattern, not the ingredient that ends it. The more hours the bed holds wakefulness, the more reliably it produces it. Cutting that time, even though it feels like losing sleep, is what lets the association reverse. Stimulus control is among the most consistently supported components of insomnia treatment for exactly this reason. What feels like the wrong direction is often the way through. The first thing most of us do at 3 in the morning is look at the clock. That reflex has been studied, and it works against you in a very specific way. The number does not give information, it gives arithmetic. 4 hours and 10 minutes left. Now 3:50. Each glance updates a countdown, and the countdown raises alertness at exactly the moment alertness is the obstacle. Turning the clock's face toward the wall or moving the phone out of reach removes the question rather than answering it. Not knowing the time is a kindness you can offer yourself in the dark. If you have ever calculated precisely how wrecked tomorrow will be, you know how quickly the body responds to that arithmetic. Researchers studying arousal in insomnia find that expecting a bad day produces the same bodily signature as the bad day itself. Heart rate up, muscles tightening, the mind sharpening rather than softening. The prediction does the damage before the day arrives. And the prediction is often wrong. People routinely function better than their 3 in the morning forecast. You can let tomorrow stay unmeasured for now. It is not a night that needs solving before it ends. There is a reason so many people wake in the small hours already too warm. Core body temperature falls through the first half of the night and reaches its lowest point in the hours before dawn. The drop itself is part of what deepens sleep. A room that holds heat blunts that drop, and the body surfaces looking for cooler air. Most sleep guidance points toward a bedroom on the cool side of comfortable, with breathable layers you can push away without waking fully. Sometimes the body was not troubled. It was simply looking for a temperature it could not find. A sliver of light under the door, a charging indicator, a street lamp in the curtain gap, none of it feels like much. The eye disagrees. The cells that report brightness to the body clock keep reporting all night, and they do not need you awake to do it. Darker rooms, heavier curtains, a piece of tape over a glowing diode, small, unremarkable adjustments. Many people find them the easiest change on any list, and among the few that ask nothing of you in the moment. You can lower the room's voice once in daylight, and it keeps working after. The room has been speaking to you all along, quietly. Some wakings arrive with no thought attached at all. You are simply awake, and nothing explains it. Sound is often the missing explanation. The sleeping brain keeps processing noise. Late in the night, it responds more to sudden changes in sound than to steady ones. A door, a pipe, a car. Brief, unremembered, enough. Steady, low sound from a fan or a quiet track can smooth those edges without adding stimulation. You may never learn which sound woke you. You can still make the night less full of edges to wake against. If you do get up, the instinct is to turn on the lights or reach for a screen, and both undo some of what the darkness had been building. The invitation is not darkness. Moving around a dark house has its own problems. It is dimness. One low lamp, warm rather than white, only where you are. Enough to see the chair or the page by, not enough to convince a half-asleep brain that morning has quietly arrived early. Many people find that the distance between a bright kitchen and a single warm lamp is also the distance between returning to bed and giving the night up entirely. Some of what wakes you at 3 was already decided by 9 the night before. The evening drink that made falling asleep effortless. The late heavy meal still being digested. The afternoon coffee whose effect had not fully cleared. Each one tends to land later in the night rather than early. Removing them is not the only option. Many people simply move them earlier or lighter and watch what the next week does. Small shifts in the evening, tested gently, tell you more about your own nights than any general rule ever could. The mind that will not stop at 3 in the morning is rarely solving anything. It is rehearsing. Clinicians working with sleep often suggest a deliberate worry window during the day. 15 or 20 minutes sitting up with paper. The circling thoughts get written down and, where possible, given a next step. It sounds almost too plain to work. What researchers observe is that the mind returns less insistently at night to what it has already been properly heard about. You can give the worry an appointment. It tends to keep it and to stop showing up uninvited. If something surfaces anyway in the dark, there is a gentler option than arguing with it. Keeping a pad beside the bed and writing the thought down, a line, not a plan, lets the mind stop holding it. Studies of pre-sleep writing suggest that unfinished items keep a kind of tension, until they are recorded somewhere the mind trusts. Written down, they lose their urgency to be remembered. The point is not to solve it at 3. The point is to let the thought stop needing you awake in order to survive until morning. There is a way of breathing that the body reads as safety, and most of us stumble into it only by accident. When the out-breath is longer than the in-breath, the vagus nerve carries a signal that slows the heart slightly with each exhale. It is a small, measurable shift toward the calmer branch of the nervous system. 4 counts in, 6 or 7 out for a few minutes, with no effort to sleep attached to it. Many people find the sleep arrives sideways while they were busy with something else. The body has always had a way back down. It responds to being invited. Perhaps the hardest thing to accept is that trying to sleep is part of what keeps you awake, wanting lifts arousal, and arousal holds off the thing wanted. What researchers offer against that loop is not a technique, but a posture, and it is easier. Lying quietly in the dark, asking nothing of the night, is not the failed version of sleeping. Rest is real, even when sleep is not. Muscles let go, the heart slows, the mind stops running errands, and the body takes something genuine. Sleep arrives once you stop auditioning for it. Give the night nothing to pass, and it stops feeling like a test. One good night rarely changes anything, and one bad night rarely ruins anything, and both facts tend to arrive as a relief. What the research on sleep habits keeps showing is that outcomes follow the pattern held across weeks, not the performance of any single night. A wake time kept 5 days out of 7 still anchors the clock. A worry window missed on Tuesday still works on Wednesday. The people who do best are usually not the most disciplined. They are the ones who resumed most easily. Tonight can be imperfect and still count in full. It is worth noticing what you use to judge a night, because most of us judge by arithmetic, hours counted, wakings remembered. Sleep researchers tend to look somewhere else entirely at the day. Steady energy, a mind that holds its focus, a mood that stays roughly your own. These track sleep quality more faithfully than any number recalled at dawn. Trackers and tallies can quietly become another source of arousal. You can measure by how the afternoon feels rather than by what the night reported. The night is not the exam. The day is where the answer shows. When the pattern has been running long enough that it has become the shape of your nights, there is a well-mapped path that does not start with medication. Professional guidelines, including those of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, regard cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, as the first-line approach for ongoing insomnia. It gathers much of what tonight has described, structured over several weeks with a clinician, in person, or through guided programs. This is offered as information, not as instruction. Knowing a path exists changes the character of a difficult night, even before anyone walks it. Everything the night has been describing gathers into one plain idea. It is not the waking that decides the health of your sleep. Human sleep has always surfaced, in every era and every body, several times before morning. What carries weight is whether you fall back and how long the pattern holds. A waking followed by sleep is architecture. A waking followed by hours, repeating across months and reaching into your days, is a pattern worth attending to with help. The line was never drawn at the moment your eyes opened. It was drawn in what came after. The pressure to sleep has been building since the moment you woke this morning. It gathered while you worked, while you waited, while you were thinking about something else entirely. No decision started it. No effort has been sustaining it. Right now, it is still gathering quietly underneath whatever your mind is doing with this hour. That is the part worth resting on tonight. The return to sleep was never a skill you were failing to perform. It is a slope the body was already standing on. You can stop trying to find the way down. It has been carrying you the whole time. What remains of tonight arrives softer than what came before, the same understanding, wearing fewer words. Somewhere tonight, your eyes may open again, and the difference now lives in the quiet second that follows. No verdict gets issued. No arithmetic about tomorrow starts running. A body surfacing in the dark is not evidence against you, and you no longer read it that way. The room is dim, the hour is ordinary, and being awake inside it for a while is allowed. That permission is not a trick played on yourself. It is the closest thing to rest that wakefulness can hold. Failure was always the wrong word for what happens at 3 in the morning. Failing takes a task, a standard, someone keeping score, and the night has never offered any of the three. It only offers hours, some of them lighter than others. When you let go of the idea that you were losing at something, most of what made the waking unbearable goes with it. What stays is a person, in a bed, in the dark, breathing. There is a kind of relief that arrives without solving anything. Nothing about your night has been fixed by the last hour of listening. The hours still pass the way they pass. What changed is the meaning you hand them, and meaning turns out to carry most of the weight. The same waking, read as ordinary instead of ominous, costs a fraction of what it used to. You did not gain control. You put down a burden you were never assigned. The night is not working against you. It has no plan for you, no opinion about your day, no interest in whether you deserve the rest you are asking for. What feels like opposition is only a body cycling through its own architecture, while a mind, half-lit, tries to make a story out of it. Take away the story, and the hours become what they always were, neutral, patient, indifferent, in the kindest possible way. Think of the person you were before tonight, lying in the dark, certain the open eyes meant something had gone wrong. Nothing about their body was different from yours. Only the interpretation was. That is worth sitting with, how much of the suffering lived in the reading rather than the event. You cannot unknow this now. Even half asleep, some part of you carries the gentler reading, and it will be there the next time the dark returns. If you wake tonight, you already know what to think instead of panicking. Not a technique to perform. A sentence to rest on. This happens, it happens to nearly everyone, and it does not decide anything by itself. That sentence takes no effort to hold. It asks nothing of your hands or your eyes. It simply occupies the space where the alarm used to go, and the space fills quietly, the way a room fills with dark. Fear of the night was always a kind of anticipation, bracing in the evening for something that had not happened yet. Anticipation costs more than the event. When the bracing loosens, bedtime stops being a test you are about to sit. You lie down as someone entering hours, not someone entering a trial. And a body that is not bracing has an easier time doing the one thing it was already built to do. You can be tired tomorrow and still be well. The two were never opposites. A short night, a broken night, a night with a long gap in the middle, none of them erase what a person is. Days built on thin sleep have carried people through decades of ordinary living. The tiredness is real, and it deserves gentleness, not alarm. It is a weather, not a verdict, and weather changes without asking permission. Somewhere in this arrives a strange tenderness toward your own body. It has been keeping cycles all your life without instruction, without thanks. Through every season you barely survived. The surfacing at 3 in the morning was part of that keeping. It was never a betrayal. It was a system doing exactly what it does. in a room that happened to be quiet enough for you to notice. Not knowing the time is its own small freedom. The number was never the thing that hurt, it was what you did with it, the counting backward, the calculating of what was left. With the face turned away, the dark stays undivided. Hours you cannot measure are hours you cannot lose. There is more room in an unmeasured night than most people expect, and the room is soft. Some nights will still be long. That is worth saying plainly, because a promise otherwise would be a lie, and lies do not help anyone sleep. There will be stretches when returning takes an hour, when the mind runs on and the body will not follow. Those nights are not a collapse of everything you learned tonight. They are simply nights. You will meet them with fewer weapons and less fear, which turns out to be enough. And if the pattern stays, many nights a week, month after month, with the days going grey around it, that is still worth a conversation with someone qualified to listen. Saying so is not a warning. It is part of the same gentleness. Care is one of the ordinary things a person can reach for, no more alarming than any other kindness. Knowing where the line sits is what lets you stop policing every single night. Notice how little of this asked you to try harder. Nothing tonight ran on effort or willpower, or the promise to be better at sleeping. The gentlest paths through the dark are the ones that ask the least. Trying is a form of alertness, and alertness is what the hour does not want. You get to stop working at this. The permission is not a reward. It is the mechanism itself. There is an intimacy to the quiet hour that daylight never allows. No one is asking anything of you. Nothing is due. The house holds still in a way it never does at noon. Under all the years of dreading it, that hour was also the most unclaimed time you own. It can be endured. It can also, some nights, simply be inhabited. The people awake with you right now are more numerous than you can picture. Different rooms, different reasons, the same soft ceiling and the same dark. None of them are failing either. If there is comfort in it, take it. This hour is crowded with company that will never introduce itself. Being awake alone was always a misreading of the geography. You will forget most of this by morning, and that is fine. The details will thin out the way details do. What tends to stay is the tone, a lowered temperature around the whole subject of waking. Tone survives the loss of facts. It shows up as a shrug where there used to be a jolt, and a shrug at 3 in the morning is worth more than anything you could memorize. Trust rebuilds slowly, and it rebuilds anyway. For a long time, your bed may have felt like a place where something goes wrong. That association was learned night after night, and it comes apart the same way, unremarkably, over many ordinary evenings, without any single night doing the work. You are not waiting for one perfect night. You are letting an average shift. Kindness toward yourself in the dark is not softness for its own sake. A mind that berates itself at 3 in the morning stays alert to keep the argument going. A mind that lets itself off the hook has nothing left to hold on to. Gentleness is the practical option here. It happens to also be the humane one, which is a rare piece of luck. Whatever you were afraid the waking meant, it can be set down now. Not resolved, not disproved, just set down, the way you put a bag on the floor when you finally reach the room. It stays where it lands. You are not carrying it into the dark with you tonight, and the hours ahead are lighter for what stayed behind. Everything you learn tonight works while you are asleep too. It does not require your attention to stay true. If your eyes never open before morning, none of it was wasted. The fear it dissolved was doing its damage in the evening, long before any waking. That part of the night has already changed. whether or not the rest of it does. You are not behind, not in sleep, not in the repair the nights are quietly doing. Bodies do not run on schedules issued by the anxious mind. Yours has been catching up in ways you cannot feel and will never be shown, on nights you counted as lost and nights you barely remember. Somewhere in this hour, without any oversight from you and without waiting for your approval, the ordinary work continues. The dark is going to hold you either way, awake or asleep, all night or in pieces. It never asked which one you would be. There is nothing to qualify for here, no state you are required to reach before the night will keep you. It is keeping you already, and it was keeping you on all the nights you thought you were doing it wrong. Let the room grow larger than the thought. That is all the night ever wanted from you. Let the ceiling and the sheets and the faint sounds outside take up more space than the running commentary. It happens on its own once the alarm is gone. The world at 3 in the morning is quite wide, and you have been living in a small corner of it. Whether sleep returns in 10 minutes or an hour, or not at all before the light, you are still someone who rested tonight. Rest was never only the unconscious part. Lying still in the dark without a fight is its own kind of restoration, and it counts for more than the tally of hours ever showed. Your body has been taking it this whole time, quietly, without announcement, while you listened. The night was never keeping score. It has no record of the hours you lay open-eyed, no ledger of what you owe it, nothing to hold against you in the morning. Whatever it gives you tonight is yours, and whatever it withholds takes nothing away from you. You do not sleep well by earning it. You sleep the way a person sleeps who has finally stopped being afraid of the dark they were already lying in. Picture the hour you used to dread, the dim ceiling, the cool edge of the sheet, the house holding perfectly still around you. Nothing in that picture was ever the problem. The waking was only ever a body turning over in its own night, and the fear was the part that hurt. Let that fear thin out now, the way a room loses its edges when your eyes stop looking for them. Let the ceiling go soft. Let the hour go wide. There is nothing left in this dark that you were ever losing to. Something has gone quiet that used to be loud at this hour, not the room, the running commentary underneath it, the one that turned a pair of open eyes into a case against you. It was never accurate. It was only practiced. And practice comes apart slowly, the way most learned things do, without any announcement of the moment it lets go. Tonight you lie down, carrying less than you did. The hours ahead are the same hours. You have simply stopped standing guard over them. If they give you a stretch of open-eyed dark, it will cost you almost nothing now. A few minutes of a quiet house, an ordinary body doing an ordinary thing. And if they give you nothing but sleep, you will not have earned that either. You will just have had it the way anyone does. The sleep science playlist keeps returning to this territory, what the body does after the lights go out, and why it so rarely means what we fear. It is waiting whenever you are ready. You can let these thoughts settle now, the way a house settles into itself after the last light goes off. Let your body grow heavy against the sheets, heavier than the thought of tomorrow. If sleep comes, let it take you into an hour that is not keeping count of anything. And if you surface again before morning, let it be an ordinary thing happening in an ordinary room. Rest well, quiet one. The dark has been holding you all along, on the good nights and the long ones alike. The night is not measured by when you woke, only by how gently you came back. Oh, good night,